The morning bells of Vesa Prime were still ringing when the sky turned red. It was a Tuesday by the old Earth calendar, the kind of bright, soft-aired day the colonists had crossed 300 light-years to find. Wheat, actual wheat, grown from seedstock smuggled out of Kansas a generation ago, rippled across the lowlands in pale gold waves. Children chased a herd dog through the irrigation channels. A pair of old men argued over chess outside the chapel. The colony had no army. It had never needed one. Myra Cale was elbow-deep in the guts of a busted harvester when the alarm tower screamed. She froze, every colonist did. The siren was a relic from the founding charter, a legal requirement no one had expected to ever hear. For a half-second, Myra thought it was a drill. Then the first plasma lance came down out of the clouds and the chapel simply stopped existing. The shockwave threw her against the harvester. Heat washed over the field. When she lifted her head, the chess players were gone. The dog was gone. The chapel was a crater wider than a city block, and the air smelled like burnt iron and ozone. The ships came down through the smoke. She knew the silhouettes from cargo pilot rumors. Long, hooked, asymmetrical hulls painted the color of dried blood, crimson maw. The pirate confederation that the Galactic Concord had been promising to do something about for 40 years and never had. They preferred outer rim worlds. They preferred soft targets. They preferred humans because humans had no warships out this far and no allies who cared. Myra dove into the irrigation ditch as the dropships bled out their cargo. Tall, four-armed reavers in scavenged armor, laughing, already firing. The screaming started. She crawled through mud and silt past things she would not let herself look at until she reached the maintenance hatch behind the silo. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key code in. Inside, beneath a false floor that the founders had installed and never spoken of, was a metal box the size of a coffin. Stenciled on its lid in flat black letters, "If you are reading this, you are already dead. Activate anyway." Myra's father had told her about the box once, drunk the night her mother died. He had called it the priest's box and refused to say more. Every human colony had one. Earth pretended they didn't exist. The Conquered had searched for them and never found one. They were, officially, a paranoid frontier myth. She pressed her bloody palm to the panel. The box recognized her DNA. Every adult colonist was registered without their knowledge and opened with a soft pneumatic sigh. Inside was no weapon, no escape pod, just a single dull gray transmitter no larger than a fist and a card with 1 line of text. "Speak the name of your home, then run." Above her a child was crying. The crying stopped. Myra lifted the transmitter to her cracked lips. Her voice came out as a rasp. "Vesa Prime." The transmitter blinked once in green and then went dark. No confirmation, no pulse, nothing at all. For a long moment she thought it was broken, that the priest's box was a lie the way she'd always half suspected, that her people had been left to die alone. Then she felt it, a deep infrasonic thrum she felt in her teeth more than heard, as if something very old and very large had just opened one eye somewhere in the deep void. The transmitter, dead in her hand, had no power source to thrum. She was sure of it. Outside, the reavers were singing a victory hymn in a language she didn't speak. Myra Cale, 26 years old, only living member of the Vesa Prime Engineering Corps, slid the transmitter into her jacket, picked up a wrench because it was the only weapon she had, and crawled back into the burning fields to find anyone still alive. She did not yet know what she had just woken. But 3 jumps away, in a stretch of nothing the star charts marked as empty, a fleet that did not exist had just received its first order in 9 years. And it was already moving. There is a region of space between the Orion Spur and the Sagittarius Arm where the stars thin out and the dust thickens, and the Concord's long-range scanners report only static. The Concord calls it the Hollow. Astrocartographers call it a navigational hazard. Smugglers call it haunted and refuse to fly through it. They are, all 3 of them, correct. Inside the Hollow, drifting in formation without running lights, without transponders, without any electromagnetic signature that the rest of the galaxy would recognize as a ship, the Black Watch had been waiting for 9 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Captain Adrian Voss was in the meditation cell of the Erebus when the signal came in. He was 43 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples sometime during the long silence. He had not seen the surface of a planet in 6 years. He had not seen Earth in 12. The Black Watch did not take shore leave. The Black Watch did not exist. The wall in front of him bloomed soft red. Voss opened his eyes. He did not stand up immediately. He had trained himself after the Karen incident not to stand up immediately. The first 3 breaths after a signal were the most dangerous. They were the breaths in which a captain decided who he was about to become. He took the 3 breaths, then he stood. The corridor outside his cell was already alive. Crewmen moved with the quiet, practiced economy of people who had drilled for this moment their entire adult lives and had begun to believe, in the deep place no one admits to, that the moment would never come. Now it had. They did not cheer. They did not speak. The Black Watch did not cheer. Commander HSU met him on the bridge. She was a small woman with eyes like flint and a service record that had been deleted from every Earth database before her promotion. She handed him a slate. Vesa Prime, she said, agricultural colony, population 9,400, Crimson Moss signature. Strike was about 3 standard hours ago. The beacon went up 19 minutes after impact. Voss read the slate. His face did not change. His face never changed. Survivors. 1 confirmed engineer named Kale. The beacon registered her DNA on activation. Anyone else looking? Concord Patrol is 6 days out. They will arrive to ash and bury what they find. They will issue a statement of regret. They will do nothing. As they always do, Voss handed the slate back. Set the fleet for 3-stage burn. Translation in 12 minutes. I want the Erebus, the Tartarus, the Acheron, and the Cocytus on point. Hold the Phlegethon in reserve. We do not yet know what the Maw has called in for support. Aye, Captain. He paused at the great viewing port. Outside, in the murk of the hollow, the rest of his fleet was beginning to come alive. Engines warmed in the dark, not the bright blue of Concord drives, but a deep, hungry violet that no civilian ship in the galaxy was permitted to mount. Ships that the treaties said could not exist were rolling onto a heading. There were 41 of them. Earth had built the Black Watch in secret after the Tannhäuser massacre, when 6 human colonies had been wiped out in a single year while the Concord debated jurisdiction. Earth had built it, and then Earth had buried it so deep in classified budgets that even most of Earth's parliament did not know it existed. It was the answer to a question humanity had only ever asked itself in the dark. If they come for our children and no one comes for ours, what then? Voss had been a young lieutenant the day he was offered the posting. The recruiter had told him, "You will never come home, you will never be thanked, the galaxy will never know your name. If you are remembered at all, you will be remembered as a ghost story told by the people we hunt." He had said yes before the recruiter finished the sentence. Captain HSU's voice was flat. Translation in 60 seconds. Voss put on his gloves. They were black like everything on the Erebus. He flexed his fingers once. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Tell them the answer is yes." HSU's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she ever permitted herself. The Black Watch translated out of the hollow in a single, silent flash, and for the first time in 9 years, the dark had teeth again. The first sign that something had changed in the galaxy did not come from a battle. It came from a missing freighter. The Suckesh's promise was a Crimson Maw resupply hauler running the spine route between the Velen Rocks and the Maw's main staging system at Core. It was a routine 3-day haul. It carried slaves, looted agtech from a Felari mining colony, and roughly 2 tons of black market munitions. It had a 4-ship escort. It had never been intercepted in 27 previous runs. On the 8th hour of its 28th run, it stopped transmitting. The escort never returned to port. The hauler never returned to port. Concord Deep Space Relays recorded a brief, anomalous gravitational disturbance along the route at the relevant time and dismissed it as a comet fragment. 3 days later, a second Maw convoy vanished, then a third, then an entire pirate raiding flotilla on its way to a soft target in the Orisian Belt simply ceased to exist between one scan and the next. By the end of the first week, the Crimson Maw had lost more ships than they had lost in any single year of their existence. And the galaxy could not find a single piece of wreckage. Aboard the Erebus, Voss watched the forward holotank with his hands clasped behind his back. Around him, the bridge ran in a hush. The Black Watch did not shout orders. It did not blare alerts. Every station whispered into a throat mic, and every voice came back in the captain's ear at the same flat volume. The bridge was lit only by the dim violet glow of the consoles. Voss had ordered the overheads off 20 minutes after first translation. He had not turned them back on. "Convoy spotted," murmured the sensor officer, Lieutenant Acaffer. "3 haulers, 6 escorts, designated Mo 11. Range, 4 light seconds. They have not detected us." "They never did." The Black Watch's hulls were sheathed in something Earth's classified shipyards had spent 40 years perfecting. It absorbed scan pulses across the spectrum and re-emitted them with a half-second of artful background noise. To a conquered scanner, a watch ship looked like the absence of a ship, a soft, dark place in the static where attention slid off and forgot to come back. To weapons-grade scanners, the Black Watch did not appear at all. "Translation lock on the lead hauler," Voss said quietly. "Mass driver, 1 round." "1, sir. 1. HSU relayed the order. Below decks, the Erebus's forward gun, a kinetic weapon band under the Concorde's third arm's accord, accelerating a tungsten slug to a fraction of light speed, coughed once. There was no flash. There was no sound. The slug crossed 4 light seconds in a little under 12 seconds. The lead hauler did not explode. Mass driver kills almost never produced explosions. The hauler simply opened, as if some invisible god had unzipped it from bow to stern and spilled its contents into the vacuum in a long silver streamer. The escort ship saw it happen. They did not see what had killed it. They turned in panic, scanning every direction, finding nothing, firing wildly into the dark. Voss watched them flail. "Cocytus take the rear 3, he said. "Tartarus the forward 2. Acheron the second hauler. Erebus will handle the last." 4 soft acknowledgments came back through his earpiece. In 38 seconds, the convoy was gone. There was no debris field worth recovering. The watch's gunnery doctrine called for fragmentation rounds at high velocity, the kind that turned a starship into a thin, expanding cloud of dust that would be indistinguishable from cosmic background within a week. It was not subtle warfare, it was patient warfare. It was the warfare of a species that had decided, very quietly, that it was tired of being hunted. In the conquered capital on Yelthon, the speaker of the outer worlds was reading the 3rd such report in as many days when she finally set down her tea. "This is impossible," she said. Her aide, a young Farron whose head feathers had gone pale, did not contradict her. He simply set a 4th report on her desk and a 5th. "We are losing ships at a rate the Maw alone cannot explain," she said slowly. "We are losing them along the routes we permit the Maw to use." Her gaze sharpened. "We are losing them along the routes we quietly profit from." The aide swallowed. "Get me the human ambassador," the speaker said. "Today, now." He bowed and turned to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "Speaker," he said, "if I may. Some of the captains, the ones who survived encounters along that corridor, they have been saying a word." "What word?" He glanced over his shoulder. The light in the speaker's office was warm and golden. The hallway behind him was, for a single breath, very dark. "Wolves," he said. The way station was called Hook's Rest, and the Crimson Maw had held it for 60 years. It was a hollowed-out asteroid the size of a small moon, drilled through with docking bays and slave pens and gambling halls and 3 competing brothels, all of them lit in the same nauseous orange that pirate culture had decided meant home. 5,000 reavers lived aboard. 12,000 captives did not so much live as endure. The Concord had a standing patrol order to give Hook's Rest a wide berth. It was, by treaty, considered a sovereign criminal entity, which was the polite Concord term for "we do not want to fight them." The Black Watch did not recognize the treaty. Voss read the strike plan in his quarters by the single low lamp he permitted himself. He had been a gentle man once before the Black Watch. He still believed, in some vestigial chamber of himself, that he was. The strike plan he was approving called for the death of every armed combatant aboard Hook's Rest, the liberation of every captive, and the deliberate sparing of exactly one pirate who would be sent home with a story. He approved the plan and went to put on his armor. The watch came in sideways. That was the doctrine, never approach from the angle a sane fleet would use. Hook's Rest had its main gun batteries oriented along the system's ecliptic, where a conquered assault would have to come from. The Black Watch translated above the ecliptic, dropping out of subspace in a hemispherical formation that placed every Maw gun emplacement inside their effective range and every Watch gun emplacement outside the Maws. The Maw's master gunner, a broad-shouldered Trell named Kazun who had been promoted 3 times for cruelty, saw the formation appear on his scope and did not, at first, understand what he was looking at. It seemed to him, for one absurd second, that someone had spilled ink on the hollow tank. Then the ink began to fire. Hook's Rest's outer gun ring went silent in 9 seconds. The Maw scrambled fighters. The Watch had anticipated the fighters. The Cocytus deployed a swarm of automated interceptors, small, lightless drones that the Conquered had also banned, also pretended did not exist, and the fighter screen lasted 41 seconds. Then the boarding parties came. A young reaver named Trell Vasek, who had joined the Maw 3 years earlier because his home moon had nothing else to offer, was in the lower brothel level when the lights went out. He had been trying to get a free drink from a Felari girl who had clearly not been Felari before someone broke her face. When the lights died, the girl looked up, not at the ceiling, the way Trell did, but at him, and for a single heartbeat he saw an expression on her ruined face that he would remember for the rest of his short life. It was hope. The lights did not come back on. What came on instead were small red points of light, in pairs, walking down the corridor in absolute silence. Trell reached for his sidearm. His sidearm was no longer at his hip. He did not understand when it had been removed. The red points came closer. There were a great many of them. A voice spoke in trade very quietly. Hands. Trell raised his hands. The voice spoke again in the same flat register. On your knees. He went to his knees. A gloved hand, black, segmented, without insignia, closed around the back of his neck. He could not see the figure attached to it. The figure existed in the dark, and the dark was somehow the figure. You will live, the voice said. You will be the one who lives. Do you understand? Trell did not understand. He nodded anyway. He was made to watch. He was made to watch as the Watch went room by room through Hook's Rest, doing what they had come to do. He was made to watch as the captives were freed, gently, with blankets and water and human medics whose faces he could not see beneath their helmets. He was made to watch as the Reaver Lords, the ones who had owned the slave pens and the brothels and the gambling halls, were brought before a tall man in dull black armor and judged by a tribunal that lasted exactly the time it took for the man to look at each of them and nod, once slowly. The man's face was hidden behind a visor, but Trell saw in the visor's reflection his own face, and behind it the face of the Felari girl with hope in her eyes, and he understood, finally, what the Black Watch was, and what it had come for, and what it was going to leave him alive to say. When it was over, the tall man knelt down in front of him. Tell your warlord, Voss said softly, that we came for Vesa Prime. Tell him we are not finished. Tell him there is no rock he can hide behind. Trell was put aboard a damaged shuttle with one functioning engine and pointed at Core. He flew home shaking. The conquered chamber on Yelthon had been built 3,000 years earlier to hold the gravity and the dignity of an empire of 700 worlds. Its ceiling was a single sheet of singing crystal that hummed at a frequency tuned to soothe diplomatic tempers. Its floor was a slow-rotating mosaic of every species that had ever signed the conquered charter. Its acoustics were such that even a whisper from the speaker's dais reached every delegate's ear with perfect clarity. It had never, in all its long history, been as quiet as it was the morning Ambassador Alina Reyes of Earth walked in. She was small, she was unarmed. She wore a simple gray suit and a single piece of jewelry, a silver pin shaped like an old earth oak leaf. She walked the long mosaic alone because Earth had, at her insistence, declined the customary honor guard. She did not look frightened. That, more than anything, was what the delegates would remember afterward. The speaker of the outer worlds rose from her dais. Her voice was steady, but the crystal ceiling caught a tremor in it that the acoustics could not hide. Ambassador Reyes, Earth is summoned today to answer for a series of incidents along the rim. 23 pirate vessels destroyed. The way station Hook's Rest reduced. The Crimson Maw warlord Vrekar the Unbroken has lodged a formal grievance with this body, claiming that human ghost ships have begun a campaign of unprovoked aggression against his confederation. Reyes folded her hands behind her back and waited. Earth has long denied possession of any military force capable of these actions, the speaker continued. Earth is a signatory to the 12 Accords. Earth does not, by treaty, maintain a deep space combat fleet. Earth does not, Reyes agreed pleasantly. A murmur went through the chamber. Then how, the speaker said, do you explain these reports? Reyes smiled. It was a small, polite smile. It did not reach her eyes. Madam Speaker, she said, with respect, Earth cannot explain reports of a fleet that, by your own treaties, cannot exist. Perhaps the pirates are exaggerating. Perhaps they are losing a civil war. Perhaps the galaxy, having spent 40 years declining to police a confederation of mass murderers, is finally seeing some natural consequence. The silence in the chamber sharpened. You will understand, the speaker said carefully, that this body must investigate. Of course. You will provide full access to Earth's orbital records. Of course. You will permit independent observers in human space. Of course. The speaker leaned forward. Ambassador, she said very quietly, if such a fleet existed, hypothetically, and if Earth were, hypothetically, to be discovered to have built it in violation of the Accords, the consequences would be very grave indeed. Reyes was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle, almost sad. Madam Speaker, she said, may I ask you something, hypothetically? You may. Do you remember Tannhauser? The chamber went still. 6 colonies, Reyes said, 60,000 civilians, children, Madam Speaker. The Concord debated jurisdiction for 14 months while the bodies cooled. When the debate concluded, the Concord issued a statement of regret. Earth received that statement on a Wednesday. I remember because I was the junior aide tasked with filing it. It was 3 pages long. It used the word unfortunate 9 times. She let the silence hold. If hypothetically humanity had decided at some point after that Wednesday that we would never again wait for the Concord to file paperwork while our children died, would you, Madam Speaker, consider that a violation of the Accords? The speaker did not answer. Or would you consider it, Reyes said softly, a very late and very imperfect correction of one? She bowed formally in the old Concord style. Earth denies the existence of a deep space combat fleet, she said, returning to script. Earth offers its full cooperation in any investigation. Earth wishes the Concord every success in identifying the source of these incidents. She walked out of the chamber. No one stopped her. Encore, Vrekar the Unbroken, warlord of the Crimson Maw, threw the boy named Trelvasic against a wall. Vesa Prime, he hissed. Vesa Prime, a nothing colony, a mud farm. Why are they coming for me over a mud farm? Trell, bleeding from the mouth, did not know. But Vrekar did know, somewhere in the deep animal part of himself that had kept him alive for 3 centuries of piracy, that it did not matter why. It only mattered that they were coming. He summoned every ship he had ever owed a favor to. He fortified Kor with every gun he could buy, beg, or steal. He sat in his throne room with his blade across his knees and waited because there was nothing else left to do. 3 jumps away, the Erebus finished its translation calculations. Voss closed his eyes. Set course for Kor, he said. Kor was a fortress world. 3 centuries of piracy had bought a great many guns, and Vrekar had spent a great many of them on his capital. The planet hung in its orbit like a steel-spined fruit, ringed by automated weapons platforms, screened by a permanent fleet of 200 Maw warships, ringed again by minefields and decoy stations, and a high orbital wall of debris seeded with proximity charges. Conquered intelligence considered Kor unassailable by anything short of a full Conquered battle group, and the Conquered did not have the political will to assemble such a group, and the Maw knew it, and the Maw had lived for 300 years on the certainty. The Black Watch translated into the system at 04:13 ship time in a single coordinated flash and began killing the outer ring before the Maw's sensors finished registering their arrival. Voss stood on the bridge of the Erebus with his hands at his sides. He did not need to give orders. The Watch did not require orders in a fleet engagement. They required only a designated target. He had designated corps. The fleet would do the rest. The outer weapons platforms went first. They were automated. They fired at shadows and hit nothing. The watch's stealth coatings, married to a doctrine of constant lateral motion, rendered them useless within the first minute. The Tartarus and the Acheron peeled them like fruit, methodically, working inward in opposing spirals. By minute 4, the outer ring was a debris field. Then the screen flight engaged. This was the first time in 9 years that the Black Watch had faced a coordinated capital-class engagement, and for the first 90 seconds, Voss permitted himself a sliver of doubt. The Maw had 200 ships, he had 41. The Maw had warlords who had won every fight they had ever picked. He had crews who had drilled in the dark for 9 years and never been allowed to celebrate a victory. The first Maw flagship died at minute 6. The Phlegethon came out of reserve at minute 9, translating into the Maw's rear formation with a violence that the Maw's tactical officers had not believed was physically possible. Watch translation tech was a generation ahead of anything the Conquered had, and 3 generations ahead of anything the Maw had bought on the gray market. A watch ship could translate in system, fire, and translate again before its target had finished registering the first shot. By minute 15, the Maw fleet had stopped being a fleet. It had become a panicked cloud of individual captains, each trying to flee in a different direction, each finding a violet-lit silhouette waiting on every vector. By minute 22, the orbital wall was Voss's. He did not order an orbital bombardment. The Black Watch did not bombard. The Black Watch had not been built to kill cities. It had been built to kill people who killed cities, and the distinction, in Voss's mind, was the only thing that kept him human. "Boarding teams," he said quietly. "Vrekar's citadel. I want him alive if possible. I want him known dead if not." HSU turned to look at him. It was not in her doctrine to question an order. She questioned this one anyway, with her eyes only. "Captain," she said. "I am going down with them," he said. "Captain, Commander." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. He stopped at the bridge door. "HSU," he said without turning. "If I do not return, the Erebus is yours, the fleet is yours, the doctrine is yours, do not change it." "Aye, Captain." He went to put on his ground armor. There was a casualty list pinned to the inside of his locker. He had carried it with him for 9 years. It was the manifest of the Charon's Hope, a refugee ship the Maw had taken in the year before the Watch's founding. Voss had been a junior officer aboard a Conquered cruiser that had been ordered by treaty not to intervene. He had watched the Charon's Hope die on his scope. He had memorized every name on the manifest because no one else was going to. His sister had been on that manifest. He had not put on the armor in 9 years without looking at the list. He looked at it now. He folded it carefully. He put it in the chest pocket of his undersuit against his heart, where he had carried it down into every drill, every simulation, every rehearsal of a moment he had begun to fear would never come. Then he went down to Kor. Vrekar the Unbroken died on his own throne, with his own blade in his hand, as he had always sworn he would. He died well by his own standards. He took 3 watch troopers with him before Voss put a round through his skull at close range. Voss stood over the body for a long time. The throne room was very quiet. The fighting had ended elsewhere in the citadel. Somewhere above, the orbital battle was wrapping up. Somewhere far away on Yelthon, the Conquered was beginning to understand what had happened, and what had been allowed to happen, and what it had cost. Voss took the casualty list from his pocket. He read his sister's name once, silently. He put the list on Vrekar's chest. "For Charon," he said. He turned and he walked out of the citadel of the Crimson Maw, and the Black Watch went with him. There was one pirate left. His name had once been Trell Vossic, and he was 21 years old, and he was the last living member of the Crimson Maw Confederation that had ruled the Rim for 3 centuries. He was found in the lowest sub-basement of Vrekar's citadel, behind a stack of empty ration crates, with his hands over his head and his eyes squeezed shut, and a low, animal sound coming out of his throat that was not quite weeping. The Watch did not kill him. The Watch had never planned to kill him. They put him aboard a derelict scout ship, a battered Maw cutter with a working drive and almost nothing else. They stocked it with 3 weeks of rations and a single navigation chart set for the heart of Conquered space. They gave him a recording, sealed in a small black drive, and they made him understand that he was to deliver it personally. Then they did one more thing. The Erebus drew alongside the cutter, vast and silent, blotting out the light of Kor's wounded sun. From its forward hull, 4 cutting beams, surgical, narrow, almost gentle, went to work on the cutter's outer plating. They did not damage the ship, they only marked it. When they were finished, the cutter's hull bore a single sentence, 2 meters tall, carved in clean human script that any translation matrix in the galaxy could read. The next one who touches our people will not get a messenger. The cutter was released, its drive lit. It began its long, slow crawl back toward the civilized worlds. The Black Watch translated out of the core system in a single soundless pulse. There was no debris field worth recovering. There was no flag left flying. There was no record in any conquered database of who had been responsible. The pirates were simply, finally, gone. 3 weeks later, Trell Vossic's cutter drifted into conquered space on its dying engine. A patrol intercepted it. They saw the carving on the hull. They photographed it. They forwarded the photograph up the chain of command at a speed that would, in the Conquered's later internal review, be described as unprecedented. The speaker of the outer world saw the photograph at 0300 local time. She did not go back to sleep. The recording on the black drive contained no threats. It contained no demands. It contained no claim of responsibility. It contained instead a single piece of footage. A woman named Myra Kale, 26 years old, only living member of the Vesa Prime engineering corps, standing in a wheat field that was beginning slowly to grow back. She was thinner than she had been. Her left arm was in a sling. She was alive. She did not speak to the camera. She only stood there in the wheat and looked at the lens for a long, long time. The recording ended. The speaker watched it 3 times. Then she sat in her office in the dark and she thought about Tannhauser, and she thought about the 9 other massacres her body had filed paperwork on in her lifetime, and she thought about what the human ambassador had said about Wednesdays, and she understood, finally, what Earth had been doing in the dark for 40 years. She understood also that there was nothing the Conquered could do about it. A fleet that did not exist could not be sanctioned. A captain whose name was on no roster could not be charged. A doctrine that had never been written down could not be repealed. The Conquered could pass any resolution it pleased. The Black Watch would simply continue to not exist, and the next pirate confederation that thought a human colony looked soft would find, very suddenly and very quietly, that it had been mistaken. The speaker drafted a private memo to every member state of the Conquered. It was 1 sentence long. Do not raid human worlds. It was, in the end, the only Conquered resolution on the matter that ever went out, and it was the only one anyone ever obeyed. On Vesa Prime, Myra Kale walked through the rebuilt town square at dusk. The chapel was being raised again, slower than the wheat. A new bell hung in the new tower. It had not been rung yet. A child she did not know ran past her, chasing a herd dog through the irrigation channels. She stopped, she watched them go. She thought about the priest's box, still buried under the silo, still waiting. She thought about the thrum she had felt in her teeth that morning, the morning the chapel had stopped existing. She thought about whoever had answered. She did not know his name. She would never know his name. But somewhere in the great dark between the stars, on the bridge of a ship without a flag, a captain with gray at his temples was reading a casualty list one more time, and folding it carefully and putting it back over his heart. The Black Watch went on patrol. The galaxy slept easier. And on the rebuilt bell tower of Vesa Prime, on a Tuesday in spring, a colonist climbed the new ladder, took the rope in her hand, and rang the morning bells for the first time in a long, long while. They carried very far.